Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 37th meeting, I believe, of the Tax Structure Commission. My name is Steve Trenholm. I'm joined today by my fellow commissioners, Deb Brighton and Bram Klempner. We're almost to the end. We've issued the draft report, and today we'll be going over some of the comments that have come in from the public. Bear with me for just 1 second. As I call up the agenda. It's not posted today. So the first order of business, I'll have to wing it, Sean, because the agenda's not there. First order of business is approval of the minutes from the prior meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 And Saoirse, I don't know if you can see it. When I look at the January 25 meeting, it has the agenda oval there, but maybe.
Yeah, I'm seeing it too. If you click on the agenda button, or maybe you need to refresh.
Okay, I don't have an agenda button.
But next up is public comment, and we have Karen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So we can go while you find it.
Here we go. We've got it. I've got it.
Okay.
So, as we always start out in public comment, we'd like to invite the public to comment via email to taxcommission@ledge.state.vt.us. That's tax commission, all one word, at leg.state.vt.us. And Sean, did we have any, other than the public comments that we'll go through on the reports, did we have any public comments to share?
No, as we said, we have Karen here to speak to it, and we have the written feedback from the dozen and a half or so people that we'll get to in the next section. But that's everything for this section.
Okay, so since we are in public comment, I would like to invite Karen to come on and speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I did want to follow up on my comments that I sent you all in a letter because the VLCT Board of Directors took a position at their meeting last Thursday to support the recommendations of the Tax Structure Commission. We have had a position for a very long time urging the legislature to move away from the overburdened property tax as the main funder of the education fund. And if I could take just a moment to read you our current policy on that issue, we've had many iterations of this. But right now, our municipal policy says VLCT supports a simple and transparent education finance system that reduces and reforms the property tax burden over the long term, and that is more closely links voters' actions in approving budgets to the taxes they pay to fund school districts. I think that that is front and center in the report and recommendations that you put together. And we really thank you for providing an opportunity to have this conversation at the legislature that I think we will not have again for years to come unless the legislature takes up your report and digs into it quite deeply. You've done a tremendous amount of work. We did have some questions from the Board of Directors, and one you've heard about from other commenters as well, which is the expense side of schools and how do we match people's ability to pay over the long term with ever expanding and growing K-12 education funds. I realized that this was not the central issue for your commission, that you were more focused on the revenue side and how to balance revenues across the state. But it certainly is a question that's out there and can't be ignored in the long term. Secondly, there were some questions about if we move to an income tax for the homestead, how that satisfies Brigham. And I was not actually able to adequately answer that question at the board meeting last week. And then we had concerns, of course, about ability to continue with local option taxes in those 16 towns that have sales tax, local option. And also what this kind of transition would mean for tax increment financing. So we did two things with respect to those questions. We did invite Deb Brighton to come talk to the next board meeting, which I believe is February 18th. I'll verify that. But if the whole commission wanted to attend that scintillating meeting, you're more than welcome to, and have a discussion about what the education property tax might look like. And then secondly, and sort of with respect to Cynthia Browning's pretty detailed comments in general, it does seem to us that the questions that she's asking are the kinds of questions that need to be answered in the legislature. And the modeling is something that needs to happen there, that you've already done a huge amount of work, and I don't know how much more they could ask you to do on this particular issue. So thank you for the opportunity to comment, and I will stay on and listen to the rest of your meeting.
Well, thank
And I'm
you,
happy to
Karen.
take questions.
Thank you, Karen. We really appreciate that. And as far as the ed financing is concerned, you're in great hands with Deb Brighton. She was the huge contributor on that front for this report. We would not have been able to come up with the recommendations and do the research that we had to do if it wasn't for Deb's deep-rooted knowledge in ed financing. So did either Deb or Bram, did you have any questions for Karen?
I did wonder specifically what the Brigham questions were. Because it seems, go ahead.
So relative to you, I'm a newcomer to education finance. Our former executive director was the education finance guru. So when the issue arose of how would an income tax meet the test of Brigham, I have to confess I wasn't able to adequately answer that question. And I think that's one of the questions that the board would have when you come visit.
Okay, so I'm not a lawyer, you know that. But my take on Brigham was that it was more concerned that in every town, that every town basically would have the equal ability to raise taxes to pay for education. And so we're defining equal ability then as, you know, everybody would have the same income tax rate rather than property tax rate to raise the same amount per pupil. So it would basically, prior to that, it was a combination of income and property was that measure. I think the more interesting question with Brigham now is when we get into the weighting study, Brigham sort of
Mhm.
looked at it as basically equal spending per pupil. And the weighting study throws that off in a sense.
Yeah.
So I think that going through the legislature, we have to look at the combination of the weighting and Brigham and the tax structure to make sure that we're fair. But I think weighting is the bigger issue at this point than the proposed change in the tax structure.
So one of the things that we didn't really understand is if you were locally voting an income tax and you're from a wealthy town, ascending town, you would be able to vote an income tax that covers a lot more of a much more robust budget than if you were from a traditional receiving town. And how does that get equalized in the new system?
Okay, so what essentially happens if you are well, no matter what town you are, for the same spending per pupil, you'd have the same income tax rate.
Mhm.
So the question then becomes, would a wealthier town have a greater ability to raise more than that? So Brigham is calling for us to give them an equal opportunity. And the question is, does having an equal income tax rate do that? And what actually happens is a lower income town, say you have two towns that are both spending $18,000 per pupil. The lower income town, they both have the same tax rate as a percent of their income, but the lower income town will actually be raising on their own residents much less of that, and they'll get much more from the ed fund. Do you see why that is? Because you're taking
Okay.
2.5, say, percent of the income of a lower income town. So
Yeah,
in a sense,
I can see that. I can see
So
that, but I'm hoping that you'll explain it to the board.
okay, all right. I'll follow up on that one and maybe have an example that will clarify it. But thank you.
Okay. All right.
Graham?
No, I want to thank you. I mean, I guess we're the league and the commission are both relieved that we've sort of arrived at the same point, and that our recommendations make sense to you, and the goals that you're pursuing made sense to us. So I'm delighted that we're able to pull together in the same direction.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to our next agenda item. Sean, our status check on the report work plan.
Great. Yeah, Sorsha, if you want to call up on the supporting documents, it's the second, the one right after the draft minutes, the report work plan. It'll look very similar to one from the last couple of weeks, just showing where we are, and I think foreshadowing the rest of today's meeting. We have last week there, the first not crossed out weekend. We got our comments back that we'll be looking at shortly. We have the appendices, which I have in the last draft of the report that's also posted, which also incorporates Steve's proposed changes and Deb's proposed changes. And we have Bram's calculator up, and I guess Bram, you'll be speaking to the other proposed changes for consumption and provider taxes. Going forth from here, I guess after we discuss the feedback and proposed edits today, it's down on Monday 125 today, what we said we were going to do in today's meeting, talk about what any changes and who's going to do what changes and how they're going to be circulated. And tentatively next Monday was slated as our tentative final meeting. So that'll be our chance to look at any of those changes that we agree to today and talk through any of those and anything else, and then just get down to just the final copy editing before delivering the report. And then I slotted in this Thursday's testimony to Senate Finance, which of course all of you know about as well. Unless anyone has any questions, I think that's the roadmap as I understand it.
Makes total sense. Deb, Bram, any questions, comments?
No, the feedback I've gotten from people who've read it is they find it accessible. A number of people have said, "Wow, this is really clear. You guys laid it out in a nice, logical fashion. I can follow it. I understand it." So I think the kind of general body is in good shape, and there are the few changes that were recommended during public comment that I guess you guys are done with, and I'm still laboring away at. But hopefully we'll be done with those. Hopefully I'll be done with my piece in the next couple of days, and I think the timeline looks good.
Great. So if we're all good with that, I think we can skip ahead to the do we want to call up the feedback, the public feedback document, or how would you like to proceed?
Let's call it up.
So on that document, I took all of the feedback that came in email form. Well, I guess everything came via email, but everything that came with just in the body of the email, and put that in the in this document with those hyperlinks and the first set of bullets. And then the additional 6 documents there came in memos as attachments. And so we posted those attachments that are also with the supporting documents in today's meeting materials. And they're linked from this document as well, but not appearing right in this document. And how you'd like to proceed here?
Did we want to go over them one by one? Bram, Deb?
I'd prefer, so we've all read them, and I think we've decided, I think there's sort of 2 questions. The changes that we want to make, we each have some that we've sort of put out there, and I know Bram's polishing his up. And then the other question would be, Sean's already responded to people, but do we want to respond, clear up any questions or whatever, respond to any of these individually?
How did the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission do that? Or did they?
I don't know.
I don't know that either. I know I believe the Vermont Futures Project, when they came in a couple months ago and shared their report, they had the feedback that came out. And I'm not sure if it was when it was in draft format or if it was after they published their report, but they had either an appendix or a companion document that published all of their all the feedback they got. But I could certainly look in to see what the Blue Ribbon did in that case.
I think I'm specifically addressing Deb's comment of, do we want to answer any, get back to people that have commented and answer any questions, or I think that's what you were envisioning, Deb?
Let me see. There are a few people that that I know that I might feel comfortable just clarifying things or dropping a note to or whatever. But I, first of all, so Sean already sent everybody a thank you note. And also, Sean, did you, I know it says something on the website that if you submit something, it may be public information or something. Do you think that we could put this list that you've pulled together, just have this file available to the public?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's available now. Yeah, right on the front of the webpage, it says that people can reach us at this email address and should expect that any comments are going to be public. And it is public now, but the fact if this document is up there with our meeting materials, so it already is public.
So we could mention in the report that the public comments that we've received on the draft are posted somewhere.
Right.
I at this point, I'm hesitant to suggest any more work for ourselves. I imagine that after 2+ years, we are all getting slightly exhausted. However, I will steel my courage and say that I think that we would be strengthening our report and doing a further service to everyone who is involved in the process if we were to take all of this feedback, and we have 6, 10, 15 or 16, and go through them and just bullet point the questions and concerns and add a sentence or two of response to each of those points. I think it'll be helpful for us to make sure we're addressing everything that people have raised, and it will be helpful, I think, for the people who provided feedback to see that we actually listened and thought about it and responded, and probably helpful to the credibility of the report as a whole if we create such an appendix and the legislature can see that we recorded and responded to all the public feedback that we got.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think also to the point of, practice, like you said, Bram, I think the questions that come up and, positions that people have for and against various policies and proposals are likely going to come up when you're talking to members of the press in the future, when you're talking to members of the legislature. So having a crack at it now before everything's final can only help you in that prep.
And I don't think it'll be as much work as it looks, because a few of these people just said nice things about us. So those are easy. And, some people wrote longish things, but their actual concerns, they're like 3 actual concerns in the midst of a lot of writing. So I think we can summarize kind of all the questions and concerns and criticisms that people raised in a document that is not too long, not too many bullet points, and then we can hopefully respond to most of them without a great deal of further work. And does that strike either of you as either foolish or impractical?
Are you suggesting then we have a separate document that pulls out a few points from each person's letter or whatever and responds to it? And it's not necessarily part of the report, but it's maybe an appendix or something like that.
Yeah, that's my thought.
Okay.
Making an appendix, and it could be appendix, whatever, appendix number X, summary of public feedback and commission responses thereto, or whatever we call it.
And going about, how do you envision going about this? Is this homework? Like we take 5 each, or and send the draft around, or?
That's a good question. I hadn't really thought about. I think probably the bulk of the work is actually ferreting out exactly what the person's question or concern is in the midst of what they wrote, and turning it into a bullet point that we, a succinct bullet point that we can respond to succinctly. And
If you'd like me to take a crack at pulling those out and sending them, I could try to group them according to the types of issues or class chapters that each of you took the lead on, or maybe have a fourth category of other that maybe you can grab from if you'd like, and can put those out, and you can draft those, and we can we get them all assigned and you draft them, we can review them in next Monday's meeting. And in one way, I don't know if this is what you were thinking, Bram, but one way to do it in the appendix would be to have the feedback and then the commission's comment on it, almost the way you sometimes see like letters to the editor, where there'll be the editor response, and they don't necessarily respond to everyone. So if somebody just gives a general compliment, just like a letter to the editor, that wouldn't have a editorial editor response underneath it. But to the extent somebody raises a few points, and the commission's response below that feedback could hit upon 1, 2, 3, 4, however many points.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and we call it public comment, questions and concerns with the responses, and we can just start off at the top by saying, we're grateful for the complimentary feedback, the praise that we received, however we phrase it, from everyone, and thank you for that. And for the people who had concerns and criticisms, we'd like to respond to those, and so forth. I think that will be a valuable final piece to this puzzle.
And we can also add that the most common response, it seems, that we've gotten is that we're not looking at the spending side. It seems that so many people have said, spending's too high, you've got to get it in line, you missed the point.
Yeah. We sure heard that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Great. Well, then
Well,
I'll
thank
do
you, Sean. Thank you for offering to go through all of this and pull out the questions, comments, concerns, and criticisms that are embedded within each of these. That is super helpful.
Sure, I'm happy to do that, and I'll circulate it, and I can put a name with a question mark next to each one of them. But obviously, all of you can. If I put your name next to something, Bram, you can say, no, I really think Steve should do this one, or or if you see that I put Deb's name next to one, you can say, I really want to do that one. You guys can obviously, whatever you want to do is great, but I'm happy to take
you can assume that my answer on all of them is I think Steve should do it.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be easier for me. I could just put Steve's name next to everything, and then
My canned answer will be, Bram told me to do it.
Fair enough.
Sean, did you get back to, I think it was Tim Denny, who seemed to have misunderstanding, and I'm not sure he would want the comment posted?
I think I have to check back on him for the emails that came through. I think I might have just given him a general email and then reached out to all of you there about that response, to make sure I was reading it the same way you were. And so I will. I don't think he responded back to me, so I'll follow back up with him and make sure that's the case. Is that kind of the right way you read it as well? That it seemed like he thought that the that your proposal was talking about basically exempting all residences and 2-acre sites, not just those that are a homestead, and that the non-homestead rate would still apply to the entirety of.
It was hard for me to figure out what he was saying, but it clearly wasn't along the lines of what we were proposing. I mean, I'd be happy to get back to him if you wanted to send me the email address.
Sure.
And then I'll tell him to get in touch with Bram.
Okay. Let's see.
So we have that for taking this. Are there any, having said that, I think having read through these, the feedback and what people sent in, are there any particular items or some of the more poignant points that you want to discuss here as a group that stood out for you?
Do we want to call up Representative Browning's comments? Those seem to be, I just want to be sure that we all are on the same page, that I want to make sure that everybody understands what Deb said earlier, and that our charge was to come up with a tax structure. And we were specifically told at the onset that we weren't to make any policy decisions, which a policy decision would be starting to try to tell them how to spend. So the crux of some of the comments that Representative Browning wrote and others also wrote, I don't know. Is that something that we want to look at, or do we just want to go forth with what Sean's going to assign out and handle it that way?
I think that it's an important point, and probably is important enough so it bears mentioning a couple of times. And the one thought I have about it is, I think what we are recommending is a tax structure that will work well at whatever level of spending the legislature settles on, that the structure can flex up or down. We've sort of got the big pieces in place. So I think that's a point probably worth making.
I agree, Bram. And I think another point is what expenses now come out of the ed fund, like the current use and what have you. That was outside of our purview. I mean, we did recommend, or we did make comments about certain costs, but as far as what policy decisions on what is an expense of the ed fund and what isn't an expense of the ed fund, I think we need to make it plain that was outside of our purview.
Yeah,
I think she raises an interesting point that she, let's see, it's not so much the ed fund per se, but it's the way that you look at our use value appraisal program. And that says essentially that land that's managed according to certain regulations, agricultural land and forest land, is going to be taxed based on its value in agriculture or in forestry.
Mhm.
And so if it were sold for development, or if it were on sale for development, the value would be much higher. But because it's in the program, enrolled in the program as forest land, it's taxed as forest land. So that means that it pays less into the ed fund than it would if it were unencumbered and, you know, could be sold for development tomorrow. And she sees that differential between the fair market value and the use value, or the value for development versus the value for forests, say. She sees that differential as something, a tax loss that should be covered by the general fund. In other words, the ed fund doesn't get as much money, therefore the general fund should pay that difference. So it's a structural question, I guess. My sense is this is the policy that's been made about how we tax. We tax houses based on sales. We tax forest land based on its value for forestry. We tax apartment buildings based on their income producing potential. It's the way we tax. And then the education rate on that goes into the education fund.
Which is not that unlike most other states, the way they handle
Right,
current use and what have you.
that's correct.
But I say,
We are-
again, I see a statement of that's a loss to the ed fund and that should be made up by the general fund. That's a policy decision. That's not part of the I see that, and I think we all agreed that the tax structure is, you know, how are we generating tax revenue? Not where that specifics where that tax revenue is going. Although I guess you could make the case that that's a tax expenditure that needs to be revisited.
Well, you could also make the case that cows don't go to school and trees don't go to school, so their taxes shouldn't go in the ed fund at all. You know,
Mhm.
so, but it's a question that she's had a lot, and it's sort of like Graham says, if we were going to pay for health insurance and start all over, we wouldn't do it the way we're doing it. We probably wouldn't have to be wouldn't have to be making this change, you know, of getting out from the current structure as frequently as we're doing if we started all over. But this is the way we have it now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think to Steve's point, I don't know the full details on it, but I think there are different models out there. Like I believe Maine's current use model is a little bit different in that the cost of the current use gets split between the state and the local jurisdiction, and based on the various programs from homestead exemptions to current use and various programs there, they have a different percentage of which part the state bears. And so I think there are different funding options out there.
But we actually reimburse the towns for the municipal taxes lost on the current use program. So we're more generous than most
Right. The state
states, actually.
Yeah, the state of Vermont picks up more of the tab than other states. And the trees point, just thinking about some of the other feedback that came in, come to the trees not going to school, that we could be a little bit slippery in the sense of some of the feedback talking about some people saying, it was interesting, I think, reading through the feedback and seeing the different the ways different people can frame what's fair or how fair is defined.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
about, well, I don't have kids. Should people that have kids, should they have to pay for the schools? Or non-residents, they don't have kids in the schools, should they, should they have to? And
I think to say Deb's point a little bit differently, not, so is it fair to assess that land the same as a parcel that's already been approved for development, when the chances of getting an approval for that parcel to be developed are probably slim to none? I mean, I think that's the crux of it. How can you say, well, I've got 40 acres and Deb's got 40 acres, but there's no way in heck that my 40 acres is ever going to get a permit to be developed. But Deb's is already permitted and ready to go. I mean, that just flies in the face of using fair market value, comparables and fair market values. And I would assert, if I were a landowner, that if you want me to keep this so that it's not developed, then I need something in return, because I could turn around and sell this and develop it and make a ton of money, and you know what, move away. It won't be my problem anymore. So that's a whole philosophical discussion that I think goes way beyond the scope of our commission work.
And I think her comments about needing more modeling and more answers, as to what the tax rate would be, and the winners and the losers and things like that, it's absolutely right. But we didn't have any capacity to do it. And so it's like the next step. But it's one of the reasons that I think, I'm suggesting putting up front our recommendation for setting up this tax advisory commission and staffing it so that we can answer these kinds of questions. I mean, not just about our proposal, but there are other things about what's happening now that we need help on. So.
Right.
And I have to tell you, it's been really frustrating for me. Just before this meeting, I went to my bookshelf to pull down the tax commission notebook. And I pulled down a notebook that said tax commission, and I opened it up and it's full of all these models, but they're ones that I did for the last tax commission.
Mm.
And it's so frustrating to me not being able to do them when I care much more. But anyway, she asked really good questions. There are things that we should do. Hopefully those will all get answered soon.
So how would everybody like to proceed?
Well, it seems to me sorry, Raymond, you're just going to say something. You want to go first?
I was just going to say it feels as though we've kind of got our path forward. I mean, I've got some more work that I'm working on right now to finish up, and Sean will divide up the public comments as he sees most appropriate, and we can each take a crack at addressing those. But I think a little more work. We're close. Got to push this last little bit of work, and I guess Monday the 8th is 2 weeks from today, right? So kind of in the final 14-day sprint to the finish line. And on we go.
Well, and I know too, Deb's already made a proposed change to address some of the feedback. I mean, really the only substantive feedback that I got was on, hey, we just got the estate tax to the point where people understand it. Why are we talking about changing it? So that's why I made my change. Said, we're recommending this because we're looking at a 10 to 20-year time horizon. However, it's not something that we would think would be looked at immediately because the estate tax is currently understandable and manageable. So again, that's, just to make sure that everybody understands the why. And for anybody that's listening to us on YouTube, I mean, I have to stress again that this was not just an exercise to look at the next couple of years. This was an exercise to look at 10, 20 years down the road and designed like a business plan that all businesses have, that every couple of years it gets pulled off the shelf, dusted off, and looked at and said, oh yeah, okay, these things, we never got to these things, but we really should do it. This is not applicable anymore because, this piece is gone. So, and again, I can't stress enough that was our goal and objective.
I'm fine with your suggested changes that you sent us.
Yeah, likewise. Very clear.
Yep. And so Deb, we can talk about yours. And
Can I just say one more thing that I noticed in your section, Steve?
Mhm.
I found something.
What you find?
Finnegan.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's spelled, the correct spelling is Finnigan, and sometimes it's misspelled. So maybe Sean, if you can
Sure.
check for the Finnegans.
Yep.
It's only because I tried to look it up and figured out that it was spelled differently.
Yeah.
And because of the complexity of the thing, that's as far as you got, right? It's misspelled.
Yeah.
Like the heck with this, I'll stick with education financing tax.
And Sorsha,
That's
if you want to
about it.
call up the draft report for this section, it's maybe the fourth document or so down. Sounds like everyone's good with Steve, so we can skip past those. But Deb's are on page 62 of the track change document. Yeah, right there. The draft one just up. Yeah, right there.
What page was it again?
Page 62 is where Deb's was 62 and 63, I think. Yep, just above, just the page. I think it starts on the page right above there. That numbered list. Yep, right there.
So I guess if I could explain what the issue is, this is trying to figure out how to do the renter credit. And we could do a renter credit and try to get at exactly the amount that's paid in property taxes on each rental unit and give that amount back to the renters. Or we could do something more generic, like the most recent change to the renter rebate gives a rebate to renters. It was set up for the same reason, basically, to look at renters' property taxes exceeding a certain percentage of their rent and having a circuit breaker so that they didn't pay, more than the right amount. So we actually tried to look at the rent that they paid and look at the income. And the most recent changes are not directly related to the rent that you pay, but rather they just look at the median rental value in the county. So we could do something similar to give a credit back to the renters. And that would be administratively a whole lot simpler. And so the first change that you see, number 3, is just saying that the landlords will file a statement that includes the name of the renter and the rent. We're not asking, in that case, listers to put anything into the grand list. The original thought was that the listers would not give another span, they'd have an expanded code. So you'd have the span for the whole property. Let's say it's an apartment building with 10 apartments, you'd have one span, and then you'd have like an A, B, C, D, E, F, G, whatever for each apartment. It wouldn't make the total value any different of the building itself, but it would just verify that there are these 10 apartments, and then you could track the percentage of the total amount that went to each apartment. Tom Vickery sent me a comment about that. He thought that we were saying that we had to add a separate span for each of the 10 units, and people would have to appraise them, and then they'd also have to send out tax bills. And that's clearly not what we planned on doing. So in clarifying it, I thought it might just be easier, particularly at this point, to just say that we would do something similar to what they're doing with the current rebate program. And so landlords would just file something saying that they have the 10 apartments and this is the renter. And they could put in the rent just so that it can be used to keep everybody honest. And so that would be the change there. And then the corresponding change on the next page, page 63. So I have two versions of this. Sergio, could you move down the page a little bit more?
And Deb, you'll see I put the first one you had in the body, and then the alternate you had I put in the comment.
Okay, well, this is fine. This would be my recommendation. Is to change that part where we're saying before you could figure it out by just allocating the appraised value of the total building by the rent. Instead, we could just say you could base the credit on the median rent in the county. And then if the legislature wanted to do it directly and actually come out with have it correspond with the actual rent, they could. And part of the reason for this is just, it's not so much the, it's the change is mainly for simplicity. But when you think about it, we recognize that renters are paying property tax on their rent, but it's pretty hard to say that it's that specifically correct. You know, it's more sort of a market and a generic amount paid for property taxes that affects the market as a whole rather than each specific unit. So I don't think we lose a lot in accuracy by going the more generic way.
That makes sense to me.
Me also. I mean, in my simplistic accounting brain, I see the credit being, you know, if there's $100,000 worth of rent and everybody paid equal rent, each person would get 1/10 of the property tax as a credit. Gets a little more complicated when a studio 1 and 2 bedroom, but it's still relatively the same. I mean, instead of 10 equal units, one's going to be double the other one, and they'll get double the single unit credit. So that does not conceptually, to me, seem all that difficult. So I'm in agreement. And I think your comment about to keep them honest about reporting the rent, I'm sure Commissioner Bolio is probably saying, yep, that gives us an alternate cross check.
Yeah.
So I'm good with those changes. Bram, it sounds like you are too.
I am.
Thank you.
And then Deb's, your other item, you hadn't put in the text, but was just the question, and if you want to talk through, we would talk through a little bit on the advisory, elevating the advisory committee part. And it sounded like everyone was on board with that. I guess the question more is, how do you want to take a stab at rewriting that section, or what's the process there?
Well, here, the more I thought about it, the more I wondered if we couldn't, so let's see, reading through your comments, the public comments, we heard a couple of times, don't do anything this year. We have a COVID crisis to deal with. The same thing that we're hearing in the legislature. So I was wondering about then maybe having an introductory section that just says we recognize that, you're dealing with COVID this year, but there are these two things that can be done without causing major change, but are sort of prerequisites to the other recommendations. And then have the advisory committee and also the incidence benefit cliff study as those two things that can be done immediately. The timeline had it in it, but I think maybe if we sort of did it that way in the recommendations, we're not saying they're the two most important things, but that we're saying they're the two things that can be done immediately and then launch into the others.
Yeah, and to some extent, have to be done first.
Yeah.
For the rest of it to be done in a solid manner.
Right. I agree. So I guess going back to Sean's question, who shall do that?
I am game to take a stab at just sort of writing that one little introduction paragraph.
Okay.
The reason I thought that was important was to say, it would seem kind of weird if we say our number one recommendation, number 1 and 2 are like little study committees
Mhm.
without, saying this is why we put them up front. And then I'll try to move them around that way. Okay. And I'll email this to everybody.
Okay.
Great.
I had one other question really from the from Allie Richards comment, and she basically said we're looking for a funding source for childcare. Everyone knows that it's a priority, and we're looking for a funding source. And I guess my question is, we don't address it, and should we address it? And in a sense, when we talk about if you want to use some of the sales tax money to straighten out deal with the benefits cliffs, the biggest issue in the benefit cliffs is childcare. But we also have said that we're not recommending new taxes. So I just wanted to ask the question, do we want to suggest that childcare is part of that issue, and that some of that money could go to addressing childcare, or not, because we essentially have said we're not doing that.
Yeah, I might be inclined to acknowledge the fact that childcare is an issue in several areas, but to stop there and not to sort of recommend allocating specific funding sources to specific
Yeah.
specific
Yeah.
needs. Childcare, comes up in the benefits cliff. It comes up, it came up briefly as one of the barriers to education that was identified in something or other that I cited. And it's, clearly a big issue in pandemic recovery. People, it is hard to work when you're dealing with a screaming 2-year-old. So, I think it's worth acknowledging that childcare touches a lot of points of our economy and is a barrier in a lot of different areas, and that we heard that from in testimony and wanted to acknowledge that for the legislature's further consideration and action.
And I think to Deb's point, I mean, if you don't want to, if you're tasked or either took it upon yourselves, I can't remember exactly if I think it was the previous statute that talked about being revenue neutral. I don't remember if yours had it in it or not, but if you adopted that standpoint, I mean, I think you can certainly point out that there's basically two ways to fix a trough, right? You can either, keep it revenue neutral and knock down the front bump and extend some of that out to make the line more steady on the way up. And the downside of that is, people who are lower income and closer to often being seen as more vulnerable, there's the downside to taking away from them. And the other way is to use other revenue to fill in that trough and bump up the trough. And the downside of that is you're no longer revenue neutral. There may be more than two ways, but I mean, if you wanted to, you could address that without coming down on one side or another, seeing that you saw that the expense side and the benefit program side as the, for the legislature, and you saw it as your role to point out this problem that exists with the tax structure.
We were not charged with staying revenue neutral the way the Blue Ribbon Tax Commission was. I think we certainly have adopted that, all other things being equal. We're trying to, as I said, we can make a recommendation that's revenue neutral, and if the structure is solid, the legislature should be able to dial it up or down as they see fit. If we have a good sales tax structure and we recommend 3.6% as roughly revenue neutral, nothing to keep the legislature from saying, hey, if we make it 3.8% and raise a little more revenue, we've still gained all the benefits in terms of sustainability and stability and fairness and simplicity. And we've raised a little more revenue. My instinct is to leave those things to the legislature
Or the
Yeah.
tax advisory group.
or the tax advisory group. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I agree that we didn't, it wasn't in our statute to say revenue neutral, but we sort of, in agreeing to consensus in the beginning, we sort of said that's what we would do. And but we can point out needs. And I'm thinking also that Representative Till asked us about the benefit cliff chart that we chose to put in there, which, had kids and childcare as being the main issue. And maybe I would just add or reread it, but maybe add a sentence to point out that this is more of an issue with families needing childcare. just make it clear that it's not all families, and also sort of point out childcare as an issue. And leave it at that. Okay.
Okay.
I think from there, the remaining parts of this report where we can either, you may have seen there were the appendices, the work on there that I added, that we discussed last meeting, that I added to this draft. And then there's the components that Bram raised that he'll be sending out in the next couple days. But I don't know if there's anything else you need to discuss on that, Bram, or if it just makes sense to send.
Yeah, I will just add that, as I said in my email, working through this, it's an improvement to separate sales and provider. I thought it was worth seeing if we could treat provider as a consumption tax on healthcare and have a uniform consumption tax across all sectors, but it actually works better to treat them separately. The sales tax rate can stay at that 3.6 because we sort of pulled out the provider subsidy, but I've added back in the point that I'd missed, which Deb pointed out, which is, there's benefit. If the idea is to keep low-income Vermonters whole and not improve things, then you can net out the reduced taxes they pay on things they already buy that are already subject to tax. Net out that reduction against the addition of a 3.6% tax on new categories, and pulling out the provider tax but putting back in the existing balanced each other out. So we do not have to go through once again, Sean, and change all those 3.6s to 3.7s or 3.5s. And, but what it does, in treating them separately, as I went through it, it really felt like healthcare taxes deserve their own chapter. So we do have to go through and check all the chapter numbers and so forth. And I apologize for, not recognizing that 6 months ago and making our lives easier, but here we are. Hopefully it won't be too much of a yank.
Yeah, no, we can do that, and we're going to be giving it that last copy editing and proofreading too. So we'll make sure we catch any cross references. And
the email you sent, was it Julie at PAI who noticed the discrepancy between the components and their sum? Yeah,
right.
So I will fix that, and I'll follow all the way through, beginning all 130 pages. I'll go and reread to make sure it's consistent with the new approach.
Great. Yeah, I did change it in the this version that's posted that we're looking at right here. But I think I noted in the comment there that you were reworking that chapter too. So maybe moot, but I did change it in this version. Great. And then on the appendices, I think from last meeting, if we want to roll down, if you have it up, Scotia, going down to page 131, appendix 1-1, I put in your bios, have your updated bios there. There's an open page that opened up, and 1-2 on page 134 brought in the acknowledgements of the written testimony and the other foundational presentations that didn't pertain to, noted that we had all those that relate to education, finance, and property tax, and the other in appendix 6.6-2. but the presentations not focused on education finance have below, which, it seems there's different ways you could lump them all together in one appendix. In some ways, having them all together would seem nice. On the other hand, because so much of it did relate to education finance, having them together there maybe made sense. I'm sure you could argue a few different ways, but it's an appendix. Not going to overly think it. If someone wants to do it differently, we can, and then acknowledge the people who came in and testified otherwise. Below this, in one page 138 on appendix 6-1, that's where we talked last time. Deb, you had talked about how you reworked the main chapter 6, the way the models were discussed there, but hadn't in the alternate models. So I just renumbered those, and I added that that short paragraph at the top, just prefacing these other four models that are listed. Obviously, if you want to word it differently, you can. And I deleted model 3. If you scroll down, Sorsha, down on page 141 into 142, I think. I didn't have that exactly from the meeting notes last time, but I think that was the general sense of where you're going. Where it was just to delete that number 3, since it appears back in the main body. So we go 1, 2, 4, 5, but 4, 5 are now numbered 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4 for the four alternates, and I think that's the extent of the changes here. Is there anything else anyone thinks we should discuss? We got some homework and marching orders. And I'll follow up with that feedback by the end of the day tomorrow, signing that out to all of you, and we'll look forward to getting your parts and integrate them in as we get them.
Good. Well, does anybody have anything else that they would like to discuss?
None from me.
Well, I guess then I would entertain a motion to adjourn, since we already have our next meeting agenda and goals set up.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Nobody's opposed, since all 3 of us said aye. Thank you very much, everybody. We will be talking this week, I'm sure, by email. And Sean and Sorsha, as always, thank you for your support and your help.
Wait, we're all on Thursday, right?
That's right.
Okay.
I'll
Yes.
see you there. Well, Sorsha will be, I think. Sorsha will be in her other committee, but I'll be there to assist you.
Oh.
Great.